Keanu Reeves, an actor admired for his humility, philanthropy, but what no one expected was that Pam Bondi, now the sitting Attorney General of the United States, would appear alongside him in a surprise panel segment. The plan? A debate on faith in the modern era. The audience was buzzing with anticipation. Some were excited, others wary. Bondi had made headlines earlier in the week for comments that many saw as dismissive, if not outright mocking, of religious and spiritual communities. Her quote, "Faith is a private matter, not something we should base our public sympathy on." That didn't sit right with many, especially not with Keanu. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd. Vanessa Cross stood at center stage. "Tonight," she said, "we're going to ask uncomfortable questions. What does it mean to live with conviction in a secular age? Are faith and kindness outdated in politics? And should Hollywood celebrities really lecture America on morality?" From stage left, Pam Bondi strode in confidently, her trademark icy smirk in place. From stage right, Keanu walked in calmly, his presence radiating an aura that could silence a storm. He wore a charcoal gray suit, plain black shirt, no tie. Simple, grounded. The applause erupted, but even that couldn't drown out the tension. Vanessa gestured for them to sit. "Mr. Reeves," she began with a calculated pause, "you're here because, despite being an actor, you've become something of a spiritual icon, known for your generosity and quiet values. But some say that kindness is performative in your industry, and Ms. Bondi here believes faith shouldn't be flaunted, especially not by those in Hollywood." Pam leaned in. "Let's be honest, Vanessa. We're talking about a man who played a hitman for a living telling Americans about virtue. It's rich, don't you think?" The crowd let out a collective gasp. Keanu tilted his head, lips parting into the faintest smile. He didn't flinch. "I don't preach," he said softly. "I just live." The temperature in the room shifted. Pam folded her arms. "Then maybe you should live quietly, instead of lecturing Americans on how to treat each other with compassion. Some of us actually make real decisions for this country." Keanu's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in focus. "Faith," he said, "isn't about who you quote on Twitter. It's about how you treat people when no one is looking. I've met janitors with more God in them than some people with microphones and titles." Vanessa raised her eyebrows. The crowd stirred. Pam scoffed. "That's poetic, but irrelevant. Policy is what matters." Keanu leaned forward. "Then maybe the problem is your policy," he said, voice now with steel in it. "When it mocks the faithful. When it dismisses people who pray not for power, but for peace." The audience exploded in applause. Pam opened her mouth, but for the first time in a long time, she had no words. The applause lingered, echoing off the studio walls like thunder trapped in glass. Pam Bondi stiffened in her chair, eyes narrowing at Keanu as if trying to find the crack in his armor. But his expression remained calm, almost unnervingly so. Vanessa Cross leaned in with a grin. She could sense the storm beginning to churn. "Well, that's quite a start," she said, her tone practically giddy. "But let's not pretend Hollywood is the moral compass of the world, Keanu. You've donated money, sure. You've helped people quietly, but don't you think that's just a way to feel good without actually changing anything?" Keanu looked at her gently. "I don't help people to change the world, Vanessa," he said. "I help because they deserve not to suffer." Vanessa blinked. He wasn't sparring. He was speaking from the deepest part of himself. But that made it harder to tear him down. Pam, however, was itching for a fight. "You keep talking about kindness like it's a policy," she said sharply. "But kindness won't secure borders. Kindness doesn't write laws. And faith, real faith, doesn't need to be public performance." Keanu turned to her. "Pam," he said, "you talk about real faith like it's something quiet and neat. But real faith is messy. It's radical. It's in the single mother with 3 jobs who still gives her neighbor half a loaf of bread. It's in the refugee who still kneels in prayer, even after losing everything." Pam scoffed again. "Please, you're an actor. A rich one. What would you know about loss?" Keanu's eyes didn't blink. "I buried my child," he said quietly. "And then the woman I loved. I held their absence in my chest every day, like a second heartbeat." The crowd fell silent. Even Vanessa's jaw tensed. "But I still believe," he continued, "in something bigger than me. In doing what I can. Not because it gets votes, but because it matters." Pam looked away for a beat, caught off guard. Maybe she didn't know. Maybe she did. and thought he wouldn't bring it up. Vanessa leaned forward again, trying to reclaim the momentum. So what, Keanu? Are you saying people like Pam, people in power, can't have faith? Keanu shook his head. I'm saying if you use faith to punch down, you're not holding a cross, you're holding a weapon. A murmur of awe rippled through the audience. Pam's lips parted to speak, but nothing came out. The studio was thick with electricity. Not the kind from lights or cameras, but something older, primal, like the hush before a storm. Pam Bondi adjusted her blazer, trying to recover from the blow of Keanu's last words. She wasn't used to losing control of a room. But Keanu hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't insulted her. He'd simply told the truth, and somehow, that was more devastating. Vanessa Cross sensed the audience shifting in their seats, no longer hungry for blood, but for honesty. She turned to Pam. Pam, you say faith should stay out of public view. But isn't there a difference between privacy and indifference? Pam straightened. Faith is personal. What people believe behind closed doors is their business. But when someone like Keanu parades it around like it's policy. I don't parade anything. Keanu interrupted, gently but firmly. I walk with it. Pam's eyes narrowed. That's semantics. No, Keanu replied. That's the difference between performing faith and living it. Gasps, then applause. Vanessa didn't even try to stop it. Pam leaned forward, voice sharpening. You think kindness is enough? What about justice? What about order? You hug people in the subway. Meanwhile, I deal with cases of murder, drug trafficking, child abuse. Your faith wouldn't last a week in my office. Keanu's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Then maybe your office shouldn't be a place where faith dies. A stunned silence. He continued. You think kindness is soft, that it has no spine. But kindness doesn't mean weakness. Kindness is what stops a man from pulling a trigger. It's what keeps a child from thinking the world has forgotten them. I've seen more courage in a hospital volunteer holding the hand of a stranger than I've seen in 10 government buildings. Vanessa's eyes flicked to her producers. Everyone backstage was frozen. This wasn't an interview anymore. This was something else. Pam looked shaken, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. So you think I'm cruel? She asked coldly. Because I think our country should run on law and not emotion? Keanu's eyes were like embers. I think cruelty wrapped in policy is still cruelty. He didn't shout it. He didn't need to. It hit harder than any scream could. Pam Bondi sat frozen, her carefully built composure slipping ever so slightly. It was in the way she clenched her jaw, the twitch at the corner of her eye. Keanu hadn't insulted her. He hadn't raised his voice. But somehow, he'd stripped her argument down to dust. Vanessa Cross leaned forward, trying to recover the reins of the show. Keanu, she said slowly, you talk about kindness like it's policy. But what would you say to people who believe strength means power, not compassion? Keanu didn't look at her. He looked at the audience. There's nothing stronger, he said, than choosing not to hurt someone when you have every reason to. He stood from his seat, not to leave, but to speak with his whole body now, his presence commanding but never intimidating. People think compassion is fragile. That kindness means surrender. But I've stood beside people in their last breath. I've watched someone give their only meal to a stranger. That's not weakness. That's will. The crowd was still, utterly still. Pam tried to laugh it off, her voice dry. Okay, that's a beautiful monologue. Very Oscar-worthy. But that doesn't solve anything in real life. Keanu turned slowly to face her. No, he said softly. But real life is exactly where it matters. Pam rolled her eyes. Right. Tell that to the families who depend on justice, not hugs. I have, Keanu replied. And you know what? They asked for accountability, yes. But they also asked to not be forgotten. They wanted dignity. And no court ruling can give you that if the people behind the desk don't see you as human. Pam opened her mouth, but Keanu kept going, stepping closer, not to threaten, but to close the distance between pretense and truth. You sit in an office with a flag behind you and a Bible in the drawer, but when you mock the faithful, the poor, the grieving, the hopeful, you don't defend justice. You trample it. The audience erupted. This time, not with applause, but with silence. The kind that says, we hear you. Pam sat down, blinking rapidly. For the first time in her career, she had been spoken to, not as a politician, but as a person. Vanessa slowly sat back in her chair, her voice barely above a whisper. Keanu, what do you want people to take from this? He looked straight into the camera. that it's okay to believe in kindness, that faith isn't about shame, that no matter what seat you're in, whether it's a subway bench or the Attorney General's office, you still have a choice. A beat passed. To lift people up or to bury them. The show went to commercial, but no one in the studio moved. No laughter. No scattered conversation. Even the cameras, still panning slowly, seemed to hesitate in the silence that followed Keanu's words. Pam Bondi sat rigid, lips pressed thin, eyes unfocused. Vanessa Cross had removed her earpiece, staring at the floor like she had just seen something real for the first time in years. Keanu remained standing, his hands loosely folded in front of him. Not triumphant, not smug, just still. Backstage, producers huddled with wide eyes and hushed voices. Did we just air a political exorcism? Someone whispered. Another simply muttered, we're going viral. The commercial ended. Vanessa composed herself and looked into the camera. We're back with Keanu Reeves and Attorney General Pam Bondi, she said, her voice suddenly gentler, less scripted. But Pam leaned forward, snapping back into form. Let me be clear, she said, her tone sharp again. I respect the power of personal faith, but I will not apologize for prioritizing law over emotion. Keanu didn't even blink. No one's asking you to, he said. But don't disguise cruelty as law. Pam's eyes narrowed. Do you have any idea what we deal with? Human trafficking, cartels, domestic abuse. If you think we can fix that with goodwill and warm hugs. Keanu cut in, not to interrupt, but to reach her. No, he said softly, but you can't fight darkness by becoming it. Another silence. Then someone in the audience stood up. A woman in a modest dress, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. I lost my son in a detention center, she said, voice shaking. He was 17. He prayed every day for someone to see him, to care. But he died waiting. The room froze. She turned to Pam. You said faith is personal, but to my boy, it was all he had left. Pam opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The woman looked at Keanu. Thank you, she said quietly. He simply nodded. More hands started going up. Not for questions, for testimonies. For stories. For truths. And in that moment, Vanessa Cross realized she wasn't hosting a debate anymore. She was witnessing a reckoning. Keanu sat back down, folding his hands. I didn't come here to win, he said. I came here to remind people that being powerful doesn't mean you stop being kind. Pam, now visibly unsettled, whispered something to her assistant and stood up. I think we're done here, she said curtly. Vanessa tried to stop her. Ms. Bondi. But she was already walking off stage, her heels clicking like retreating drumbeats. Keanu remained seated. He wasn't chasing anyone. He didn't need to. By the time the credits rolled, the internet had already caught fire. Clips of Keanu's calm takedown of Pam Bondi were everywhere. TikTok, Twitter, Reddit, cable news. A 12-second clip of him saying you can't fight darkness by becoming it hit 20 million views before midnight. People weren't just watching it. They were feeling it. On college campuses, students played the segment in philosophy classes. Churches, liberal and conservative, discussed his words during Wednesday services. Even a rabbi in New York reposted it with the caption, a sermon in one sentence. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi's office was in damage control. Her staff issued a carefully worded statement. The Attorney General stands by her belief in the separation of emotion from law. However, she respects Mr. Reeves' perspective and recognizes the value of compassion and leadership. But it was too late. The clip of her walking off stage had already become a meme. Trending hashtags, hashtag Keanu for truth, hashtag faith is kindness, and most notably, hashtag Bondi got blessed. Journalists began analyzing the confrontation like it was a Supreme Court case. One headline in The Atlantic read, When the Stoics shamed the sword, Keanu Reeves and the collapse of the political facade. Even longtime political pundits had to admit they'd never seen a celebrity speak with such clarity, humility, and sheer moral gravity. And Keanu? He stayed silent. No follow-up post. No tweet. No PR victory lap. He didn't need to say more. The message had already settled deep into the public conscience. Back at his modest LA home, Keanu sat on his porch with a cup of tea. A candle flickered beside him. His phone buzzed nonstop, but he didn't check it. He wasn't chasing fame. He never had. A soft knock at the door. It was his neighbor, Ms. Ortega, a widow in her 70s. She held a Bible and a small plate of lemon cookies. I saw you on TV, she said, voice trembling. You said what so many of us have wanted to say for years. Keanu smiled softly. I just said what felt true. She placed a hand on his shoulder. You reminded me what faith used to feel like. They sat quietly, under a sky full of stars. Two people from very different walks of life, bound by something deeper than politics, deeper than law. It was 7:42 a.m. in Washington, D.C. The sun had barely crested over the Capitol dome when the president's chief of staff barged into the Oval Office with a phone in one hand and a tablet in the other. "Mr. President," he said, out of breath, "you need to see this." President Adams looked up from his morning brief. "What now? Another leak?" "Not a leak," the chief said, dropping the tablet onto the desk. "Keanu Reeves." The president raised a brow. "The actor?" The chief tapped play. It was the clip, the one now dubbed the studio sermon. Keanu's face filled the screen, still and solemn. "You sit in an office with a flag behind you and a Bible in the drawer, but when you mock the faithful, the poor, the grieving, the hopeful, you don't defend justice. You trample it." The president leaned back slowly, silent for the entire 2-minute clip. By the time Keanu's closing words rang out, to lift people up, or to bury them, Adams had set down his coffee. Has Bondi responded? Not really. Her team's scrambling. But social media's already decided Keanu didn't debate her. He buried her. With kindness. The president exhaled. "Schedule a call. I want to speak to him. Today." The staffers exchanged a glance. "But, sir," one said, "Keanu Reeves isn't." "Well, he's not a politician." "Exactly," the president said. "That's why people listened." That afternoon, Keanu's assistant knocked on his door with a raised brow. "You might want to sit down for this," she said. "The White House just called. The president wants to speak to you." Keanu blinked. "About what?" "They didn't say. But," he used the word inspired. Keanu set his book down, The Prophet, by Khalil Gibran, and scratched his chin. "Tell them I'll talk," he said. "But not from a podium. Not from a stage." Minutes later, the line connected. "Mr. Reeves," came the calm voice of President Adams, "I've watched your interview twice. You said something this country needed to hear." Keanu was quiet. "Then maybe it's time the people in charge started listening." There was a pause. "I agree," the president said. "Which is why I'm inviting you to the White House. Not as a celebrity, but as a citizen who speaks the truth." Keanu didn't respond right away. He looked out his window at the birds gathering on the fence, the city moving quietly beneath him. "All right," he said softly. "But I'm not here for politics." "Neither am I," the president replied. "At least not today." The invitation was official, gold seal, White House letterhead, a handwritten note from the president himself. But when Keanu arrived at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, he wasn't in a tailored suit. He wore a black linen shirt, sleeves rolled, soft denim jeans, and boots that had seen both red carpets and rainy sidewalks. Secret Service agents glanced at each other. One whispered, "Is that really how he's meeting the president?" The response came quietly from another agent. "Let him in. He's the reason half the country's watching this place again." Inside the West Wing, aides buzzed around nervously. Cable news was already labeling the meeting the Summit of Soul. Protesters and supporters lined the gates outside, holding signs that read, "Faith is not weakness. Kindness is strength." Reeves' rhetoric. In the Roosevelt Room, President Adams stood when Keanu entered. "You're not what I expected," the president said. Keanu smiled, shaking his hand. "Good." The two men sat at a long table. Only a single aide remained in the room, silently taking notes. The press was kept out. Adams leaned in. "You've reignited something. People are talking about faith, not in the religious sense, but in each other. In decency. You made them believe again." "I didn't make them," Keanu replied. "I just reminded them." The president looked down at his notes. "I want your thoughts on something. There's a proposal, faith-based outreach, community-driven mental health funding, reforming how compassion is seen in government." Keanu raised an eyebrow. And we want to name the initiative after your words. The Light Over the Law." Keanu sat back, quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Only if it's not a headline. Only if it's real. If you put money into it. Not just speeches." The president nodded slowly. "And one more thing," Keanu added, his voice calm but pointed. "You invite someone like Pam Bondi to a national conversation about faith again. Make sure she listens to the people who pray with empty pockets and broken hearts. Not just the ones with podiums." The aide looked up, startled. The president simply gave a tight smile. "You're not here to play politics, are you?" Keanu shook his head. I'm here because I buried people I loved, and I still found a reason to believe in humanity. That's all I've got. But that's all most people need. There was a long silence. Then the president stood. You might have just done more in one interview than we've done in a year of policy. Keanu shrugged. Then maybe it's time to change how you talk to people.